The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Xiumin, and I'm speaking from Singapore. So it is 9 o'clock here in the evening, and I believe for you it must be late afternoon. So joining me in this webinar today will be my colleague Philip Bao, representing Congree Language Technologies. So how this webinar will unfold is that we will first spend 20 minutes on a presentation by myself regarding how we could create sustainable content based on STE, and this will be followed by the practical aspects to consider when implementing STE, whether you are doing it from a semi-automated or a completely manual writing perspective. So if you have questions, we will have a 10-15 minute question and answer session after Philip has presented. So feel free to hit the hand button that you'll see on the right side control panel, and you will get a chance to speak and ask any burning questions that you may have. So I will begin. First of all, welcome to this today's session. And yes, I would like to share my experiences in the field of simplified technical English with you, especially seeing how this international standard helps to make the creation and management of global documentation a little bit less of a headache, and in the process of doing so will create more sustainable workflow processes within technical authoring teams that could be scattered at a few locations around the world. So Simplified Technical English used to be known as Simplified English, and the official name is this wonderful acronym ASD-STE100. All three to me are used interchangeably and they mean the same. So we're talking about the standard based on my practical experiences over the past 13 years in various fields. And well, I believe that most of us here will recognize this kind of juggling. As with gaming, when you get to move on to the next level, new challenges await. So here we have business requirements to take into account on top of our daily regular workload. Just getting the work done is not quite enough. There are various considerations such as time to market, or as the case may be, downtime. Of course, we are all forced to cut corners and save costs wherever possible, and at the same time, we want to be less dependent on a specific supplier. So this means a continuous juggling game where we are trying to try and keep everything else in balance, to get our project documentation finalized on time, within budget, and with the right quality. We want to be able to do the work or get the work done our way. And of course, to engineers, it makes a lot of sense to use standards whenever possible in order to achieve similar results. So documentation is a very essential item, but it always comes in only at the very last minute. Documentation always kicks in when the product is already late, when we are already over budget for the product life cycle, and we just need to cut corners or are expected to do so. However, we still want to stand behind what we do and make sure we provide a quality product. So how does Simplified English potentially help us to achieve all of this? Well, as we know, English is a very global language, and we can find English speakers in almost every country, but their understanding of English could be different from ours and may actually be limited. And English happens to be a very rich language, meaning that amongst other things, it has a huge vocabulary. It has also about 3 times as many words as you would find in, for instance, French or in German. However, in French or German, you can say just the same things that you can say in English. You can express the same thoughts as accurately as in English. So this implies actually that English has redundant or ambiguous words. There are too many words with the same or very similar meanings. Also, grammar, English grammar is a problem even for native English speakers, and it can be highly confusing, especially to people with English as a second language or who have only a very limited education behind them. So we want to try and do away with this huge unnecessary part of the vocabulary, and what we want to simplify English grammar to what is essential to getting our message across. So you are going to see in a few minutes. After all, we're not really here to show off our literary skills. We are not writing poetry. We're not writing fiction or novel. We're not writing literature. It's not about Shakespeare. It's about informing your audience, the user, whether he is a consumer or engineer, a maintenance technician, a staff in a hospital. It doesn't matter whom we are talking to, but if we have a message for them, it should really go without saying that we want to be understood, and language should never be an obstacle. Language is a means to communicate the information that we have to present to our user, to our audience. So moving on to the next slide, we're seeing some common problems associated with the use of standard English, or whatever people regard as proper language, even when writing documentation. We do find that many readers, many users of documentation get confused at times. As part of the information may arise at times that information is not being conveyed in a very clear, easy to understand way, and language can be part of that. So the use of confusing words, ambiguity, different words for the same meaning, they all contribute to confusing the reader, and therefore he's going to need more time to review or go through your handbook, and hopefully still understand what you're trying to tell him. Of course, it can easily prompt him to get annoyed, frustrated, call a help desk, or even worse, not to buy any products from the same company anymore. And yes, it could come even worse, that he actually could be exposing himself to safety risks. Now, a very important driver for the initiatives that have been around to simplify English, to try and do away with the complex aspects of standard language, has been translation. Because translation is a highly complicated process, there is a very important reason why we need to consider translations. We need an ever-increasing number of translations, and translations as such are definitely very, very expensive. So translation cost is a crucial driver for attempts to standardize and simplify the English language as the source for translations. And again, we will see more about that in a few minutes. Apart from the costs, there is a quality issue in the second bullet point that we're seeing. So there is a quality issue. Of course, there are bad translators, there are bad doctors, there are bad drivers. Yes, there are also potentially bad translators. The many bad translations, however, do not necessarily arise from the fact that the translator is not suited for his job. You can have many perfectly valid English sentences that make a lot of sense, both from a linguistic and technical point of view, yet are impossible to translate into our languages without some genuine doubt. So a simple example would be the English sentence, to replace the gasket, especially when it is written, because you hardly hear any intonation. So does replace the gasket mean replace it, as in take the old gasket and put it back into place, or does it mean discard the old gasket, take a new and identical item and fit it in place of the old part? So in French or in German, you will have to distinguish this. And actually, your English language readers, even when they are highly fluent in the language, may have a problem understanding you here, because this word replace in English, unfortunately, has two very distinct yet valid meanings. So translation quality definitely suffers when language is not standardized, whether it is ambiguity or the lack of consistency in our source text. So, okay, if we have problems creating, understanding, translating, publishing, delivering our documentation, our product information, it means that time to market or downtime, the time the product is not going to perform the way the user wants or needs it to perform, then that means we're losing big money. Yes, simplified English, as we are going to see, originates from the aircraft industry. Your average passenger aircraft will cost a few $100 million. So any hour it is going to sit on the tarmac rather than to be in the air where it was supposed to be actually means a lot of costs to the airline. It is hardly any different with medical equipment, and we can draw parallels in just about any other industry. We just want to make sure that our product serves the purpose it is supposed to serve as efficiently as possible, and we don't want to waste any money, and we don't want to waste any time. Also, keep in mind that many products require training for engineers or service staff, even for users, operators, and of course, technical documentation normally forms the basis for training. Again, if the training materials or the technical documentation have complex language, it is going to make it more difficult to get the message across. So training will take more time, be less effective, and therefore affects the usability of our products. If people don't perform their tasks correctly, it can easily lead to damage to the product, probably even worse, damage, or in simplified English, yes, it has been so well defined. We know we should say injury to the user. So we don't want to be involved in any kind of we don't want to be involved in incidents and like this type. Damage to the product is bad enough. Wounded or dead user is definitely very bad news for any company in any field. So safety issues, liability issues increasingly play a role. And there have been quite a few occasions where a documentation has been blamed for accidents or multi-million lawsuits. So human factors are a big issue when it comes to safety. I cannot stress this enough, and documentation is a very important means to try and control, contain, and limit those human errors. So documentation is all about getting our message across, and this is just a personal reflection of mine. When you have every piece of misunderstood language has that potential to cause errors in what is supposed to be a zero defect environment. Okay, so I would like to move on to a case study. Have a look on the next slide. I've prepared two pieces of text. The top and the bottom represent the same information. One of them is in standard English, and the other is in simplified English. Up to you. I'll give you like half a minute to figure it out. Up to you to tell me which one is simplified English and which one is standard English. Now, if you might have guessed by now, the bottom one is written in Simplified English. You see that it is shorter, it is more direct, and it is more to the point. Most importantly, it does away with unnecessary information, and it uses simple words and that contribute to a higher level of reading accuracy. The same is with this slide here on in step 3, Simplified English that you see at the bottom. It does away with it forces the writer to create clear instructional steps, where if you do not need if the first sentence in the original text is only applicable for people that have already bought the product IceClack. Whereas if you do not own this piece of equipment, you do not need to even bother reading step 3. So it's important to let people know that they could go first, they could already skip this step and move on to step 5. So that's Simplified English for you. You could also see that the grammar is much easier in Simplified English, where you do away with the ing form. You don't need posh words like design, because it's simply a piece of equipment that safely opens your iPhone without damage. So all in all, you're seeing also an overall 31% drop in your text volume. So I wouldn't like to waste our valuable time right now to go through this at length. However, if you're interested in the linguistic aspects of STE and how controlled English works, that's another name for Simplified English, you can always contact me after the conference and I will gladly give a more detailed explanation. Now, so basically, Simplified English, we saw a few things on our previous slide, helps us to save cost. How does that work? Well, first of all, we see that the number of words will be lower. And in general, we see that about 20 to 25%, sometimes much more, up to 80%, provided that the original source text was that badly written. But in general, we can say about 30% of the words, 25 to 30% of the words in our text are redundant. So we can do away with those. So if I have a manual that used to have 10,000 words, I'm going to be left with 7,500 words from now on after STE writing. Now, this, of course, goes a long way towards reducing translation costs, not just by 25%. Most translators charge by the word, but good translators nowadays use translation memory, which is basically a piece of software like a database. Whenever you translate a sentence as a translator, that sentence along with its translation are going to be stored in a database. If you come across the same or very similar sentence once again, then the translation memory software is going to suggest the previous translation, and a good translator will also pass on at least part of that benefit to his customer. So that means translation cost will go down by at least 35%. And if you translate into 7 or into 10 languages, multiply 35% by 10 times, you already know the answer that most definitely Simplified English will pay for itself. Also, we would end up with fewer iterations, fewer change cycles, less rework, fewer corrections to perform. Basically, we can be more efficient in performing those operations that the documentation helps us to do. We have a faster time to market, both in delivering our product as part of the product will include manuals, and for users of the product to actually use those products in order to achieve their time to market. So, and in general, it's very difficult to put a finger on this, if any exact figures, but we avoid a lot of communication issues, such as unnecessary calls to the help desk, because things are not clear in our documents. So for those of you who prefer looking at a graph more than a table or a text, just an overview how the number of unique terms, the translatability, and the overall volume of the text are affected by the use of simplified English as compared to standard English. So we have far fewer, around 30% of the terms that we would find in standard English, only 30% of those we will still find in simplified English. So much more consistency, less variation. The text in simplified English is much easier and faster to translate, and the volume will have been reduced by about 25%. Now on to my last slide. If you wanted to implement simplified English by now, you're convinced or at least half convinced, it would be worth considering the following elements. It is possible to just obtain a copy of the specification, but that would involve a lot of work. You need to look up 53 writing rules, check every sentence you write against those rules, and as part of that, check every word in those sentences against the dictionary in the specification, as well as your list of company-specific words. Of course, software was designed to do just that for you, not to replace you, only to support you. Creativity is still the writer's responsibility, as is technical accuracy and useful content. But you can do away with much of the mechanical work by using a software tool. Both for the writer and for the software, it is important to use a dictionary or harvest a dictionary of terms that includes those words that you need in order to describe and deal with the word that you need for your products and for your organization. So something as simple as the word engine or power plant for an aircraft, anything in the chemical field, in the banking field, it doesn't matter. Those words need to be documented before you can accurately use them and write valid simplified English. And simplified English is definitely not rocket science, but some training comes in very, very handy. As you will see, in later. And then, of course, after that, you can start writing or edit, start your editing process, and if need be, you could always consult with experts in order to get some further advice. So I'll hand over this time now, the rest of this time, to Philip, so that he could take you through the process of semi-automating the simplified English writing.
Thank you, Shumin. Yeah, you heard it from Shumin. The benefits of writing in STE, they are huge, but of course it's not something which you can do from one day to another. So writing in STE is not completely easy. We have to think about how we get all our authors to write in clean STE. How can we cover all those rules that exist? So we have a lot of rules. We have a lot of decisions to make regarding word use. So what words can I use? So it's still STE, and what words can we not use? We have to train a lot of people. We have to get a lot of people on board. And yeah, we have to somehow unite many writing styles which we currently have, and convert all those writing styles into this one STE writing style, which provides a very easy to understand documentation in the end. And this is where Congree comes into play. Congree is a author assistance tool which connects directly into your editing environment and always gives you hints while you write about your STE quality. So whenever you write a sentence, Congree will tell you right away if this is following the STE guidelines and what could be improved, and how your overall documentation has to be considered. So is it close to STE? Is it far away from STE? And this is something I would like to show you now hands-on. You should be able to see my screen now. And yeah, the first thing we are going to do is I will briefly mention a few of the editing environments in which Congree can be integrated. So hopefully you find your own editing environment here. So we have, for example, Adobe FrameMaker, Adobe InDesign, ArborText. So as you can see, there are a lot of XML editors available here. We have AuthorIt. We have web interfaces, so Congree can integrate smoothly into something like Confluence or any web interface you might have where the text boxes or editing environments exist. We have the Office portfolio, so we have Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, and Word. We have XMetal. And of course, we also have our own editing environment. So if you're creating text in some sort of environment which is not supported, you can use our own built-in XML editor or editing environment to check created documentation for quality. So how close it is to STE. What I'm going to do in this presentation, we are going to focus on XMetal as an example. This is useful for us because it's in XML, so I can show you in the data format, which is a very typical format when treating STE and when treating technical documentation in XML form. So this is the XML editor, XMetal, which you can see here. So this is the editing environment. Here I just collected some random sentences to show you how this all works. And this is what you see normally as the author. And on the left side, you see the Congree integration. So Congree is completely integrated into the editing environment, which is of course on purpose so that you as an author always have the rule package, the STE rule package close to your editing environment. Of course, you can handle this any way you like. So you can move this Congree functionality to the left, to the right, to the bottom, or to another screen. It's really completely up to you how you would like to have this presented to you. And whenever you need it, you can activate Congree like such. And then Congree listens to everything that happens in your document. So as soon as I click into text, the Congree check mechanism initiates and tries to find out what can be improved in the sentence. So it reads the entire sentence you currently clicked and finds all STE violations and other information and shows this information directly to the author. This doesn't only work if you click into text. It works, of course, as well when you write text. So when I write something like "open the hatch," it directly reacts to this text and shows me what could be improved in this text or what I should consider. And as you might imagine, of course, I can also just check my entire XML document, my entire topic, or whatever I have in front of me. And then Congree reads all of it and gives feedback to all violations which can be found and which could be helpful to write better STE. So let's have a closer look at the panel and how the information is presented. So at the top of the panel, you see this evaluation of the entire document. So as I check the entire document now, we get an evaluation of this text is complex, which means there's a lot of potential improvements still to be done. And yeah, we are going to look into some of those cases, and maybe we will manage to improve this a little bit. Later we see how many notifications have been found and how many sentences. Of course, what we see here is a certain set of STE rules. So this is the complete STE package. The complete STE package requires, for example, to check the correct meaning of certain approved words. And if you want to check this meaning for every word, it's of course a lot of notifications. This is why we see so many notifications, but I will show you in more detail how this looks like. And then we can see how many errors we have in different types, how many terminology issues, abbreviation issues, spelling, grammar issues, and how many violations to the actual STE rules. The presentation of the STE rules is done like this. So you see in this panel for each rule violation a separate sheet where you can see all the information regarding the error. And it's always presented with a short header. So you get some information as the header. And yeah, let's have a look at this one. Here, for example, do not use helping verbs. Just as a short information what this rule is about. You see the error code, which shows you how it is presented in the issue of the STE rule set. So you will find the rule 3.4 in the STE rule package, and you will find the same rule in this electronic overview. And you get some information what should be done here. So do not use the past participle with an auxiliary verb to have. Also, do not build complex verb structures consisting of modal verbs together with to be and the past participle. So this is, of course, a lot of information, but it's basically the same information the STE rule set presents to the user, but you don't have to look it up and you don't have to remember a rule. Congree presents this information to you whenever you need it, so whenever a violation occurs. You can have a look at a sample. So here the sample is actually the same as the sentence. So you see how I should not do it has been adjusting and how I should do it. And then I can just adapt my document accordingly so that this error no longer occurs. Maybe like this. Okay. Yeah, let's maybe have a look at some additional notifications. So this is the notification I mentioned before. In STE, you always have to make sure that you use certain verbs or nouns in a correct way. And for example, you always have to make sure that if you use do, it's used to complete a procedure, task, or step as a helping verb, as part as a negative command or statement, or as part as a question. So this is something which, if you're very new to STE, you should consider. The longer you use STE, the less you will rely on this rule. And this is also the reason why, for now, for this presentation, I will deactivate this rule. And we will focus on some other cases which we have. Yeah, and of course, the goal is that you go through all those notifications and do the improvements to come closer to a easy-to-read STE documentation. Here, something which is very important to notice is that there are certain STE rules which only apply for certain types of text. So here, for example, we have a note, and Congree is capable of recognizing that this is actually a note. And this information can be used so that certain rule violations are only mentioned when you are inside of a note. So for example, 55. So let's have a closer look at 55. 55 says write notes only to give information. Do not use the imperative form. If the information given in the note is important to prevent damage or injury, you must give such information in the safety instruction. So this is, of course, something very important. So you should use notes correctly. And using Congree, you can never forget, because you get this information and you can react to it right away. And of course, you also get rules where words are simply misused. So let's have a look at, for example, software applications. Here it states that within the STE dictionary, application as a noun should not be used, and you should rewrite the sentence using apply. And this is actually a very interesting point here, because let's imagine we are a software developer and we develop software applications. In this case, of course, we don't agree to this restriction. And of course, we need some way to work around this restriction. And this is where the Congree term candidates come into play. As you can see, the software application is already highlighted here, because this is the word I'm currently highlighting here. And what I can do now as an author is to tell my system or to ask my system to allow software application in the future. It's not part of the STE dictionary. Normally, I should not use application, but since for me, in my editing environment, this is important. I can propose this as a future technical name, which means that in the future, Congree will no longer tell us that software application is a problem, or that I should not use application and rewrite the sentence. So this is actually some functionality which you will use a lot, especially when you start writing with STE, because it allows to collect all technical names, technical verbs, and whatever you really want to use, although in the very restricted STE dictionary, it's not included and maybe even forbidden. Here you can provide additional information. You can provide maybe a definition. You can tell the system if this is something which should be allowed, should be okay, or should be completely forbidden for whatever reason. The context is stored at other important information which you might consider important. So this is completely configurable. So the information you might want to provide can be configured on the server side, and then I just have to click this button, which means that now I proposed software application as a future technical name, and as soon as an administrator agrees with this, he will release this technical name, and Congree will no longer mention this as a negative term. Yeah, this is how this term candidates feature will help you to build up a STE dictionary closer to your reality. So you don't really have to rely 100% on the STE dictionary. This was never meant to be the case. So of course, each customer has their own technical names, which they actually want to use and want to be allowed to use. Yeah, and the more content you create, the closer you will come in the end to a higher evaluation, and the closer you will come to a readable STE document. What is also included in Congree is the possibility to store and reuse certain phrases. This is also part of some STE rules that if you describe something, you should always describe it in the same way. So don't use different sentences every time when you describe the same idea. This is, of course, very important because the user will recognize what you wrote. He doesn't have to interpret it again and think about it again and translate it again into his own language. Also, it helps translation, because if you express the same ideas with the same words, they don't have to be translated again. Pre-translation will take care of this. So if it's 100% the same as you used last time, pre-translation will translate it, and you don't have any translation costs at all for that. So it's always useful to reuse as much material as possible. And for this, we have this additional panel here at the bottom, where you can see, for example, for the sentence which we saw before, that a similar sentence is already available in our sentence database, in our sentence memory, which looks like this, which has a sole difference that at the beginning it doesn't have this make sure part. So you see the sentence again, exactly the same way as it's written in your document, and you see a proposal which you could reuse by clicking it, so that you reuse material which is already available in your sentence database. You even get some useful information like how similar is this to the sentence you actually wrote. So you see there's a deduction for different text, for different special characters, because there are more empty spaces, and so on and so on. And yeah, I can just click this and apply this sentence into my document. This is, of course, especially helpful if I write some sentence where there are still some improvements to be made. So if I have some rule violations and yeah, want to avoid to correct text manually, I can just reuse the sentence already available in my sentence database. It already gives me some indication how I could improve this this text. Let's have a look at this example. Here we have take off the cover of the housing. And here we get the message that take as a verb is not allowed. According to the STE dictionary, you should use instead remove, read, get, or some sentence involving necessary as an adjective. And of course, I can rewrite it manually, but the more sentences I already have in my sentence repository, the more often, I will have the case where I can just reuse sentences I have in my sentence repository and just click them and add them to my document, and this way reducing the STE violations. Now, as you can see, this number is already going up a little bit, but there are still a lot of notifications to go. So to get a good STE value, I would have to fix a lot more text here in this part. Yeah, and this is how Congree helps you with STE writing, helps you to introduce you to STE writing, so you get learning on the job because you write, and while you write, you personally get the information. This is not according to our STE rules, the ones we would like to use. Please improve this, please improve that, and this is really between you and the machine. So nothing is logged, no one else is seeing it, no one is seeing that you're maybe not so firm in STE yet. So the tool just helps you to learn STE, to write in STE, and not to forget about any notifications. Also very important to mention that not all STE rules will apply to you. So there might be some rules where you just don't agree, or which just don't fit your general writing style, which you don't want to change entirely. So of course in Congree you have the option to deactivate certain STE rules should this become necessary. So I already told you about different technical names. So that's one way how to individualize all that. But of course you can also say that that you do not agree with this rule not to use helping verbs or not to use the ing form. Of course, this might become a use case for you. It will mean that you move away a little bit from the pure STE, but it also gives you a chance to fit the entire document check to your actual needs and to get to the quality for your documentation you would like to reach. Yeah, that's my part. I hope this gave you a little insight how we can actually apply what Shufrans showed us before to really reap the benefits coming with STE and writing with STE. And this way, saving not only with the STE documentation which we have, but also saving when creating the documentation so that we don't have to worry about hugely increased document creation costs.
And just to add to your point, Philip, that STE as a standard is made up of the rules and the general dictionary. It is not a complete product. It's a semi-finished product. And at the end of the day, the success of your implementation stands and falls with the quality of your dictionary. So that dictionary still needs to be established with the Congree software harvesting before any writer gets to write STE in 100% semi-automated way.
Exactly. Okay, so now we still have time for your questions. So if you would like to know more and have questions for Shufrans or me, feel free to ask us now. Also, you see our contact information. So should some questions arise later, should you require additional information about the software or about STE in general, do not hesitate to contact us. Yeah, but right now we are still here to attend to your questions. Okay, Shufrans, do you see the questions? If not, I can also read them to you.
1 second, I just need to, I don't see much showing on my screen.
Okay, we have some questions, so I will read them to you because I think this is more directed to you, to your direction. So isn't Simplified Technical English an aerospace standard, or how does it suit other industries?
Yes, so, well, The answer is yes and no. So frankly speaking, yes, it is an aerospace standard, or at least it started off as an aerospace standard. Aircraft maintenance is a very sensitive, safety-sensitive industry, and how, amongst other things, documentation and language problems played a role in causing inefficient and sometimes unsafe working practices when it came to aircraft maintenance. So this is why the aircraft industry has put a lot of effort into developing this specification that has been under continuous development for the past 30 years or so. So having been said, out of those 53 writing rules, if you ask me now, I couldn't name one that is aerospace specific. There are 2 or 3 that might require some very minor modifications in order to better suit other industries. So for example, in the general vocabulary, you get like less than 5% of those words that come from aerospace or have a very strong aerospace or defense flavor. But it's not a big issue, and when it comes to the rest of the dictionary, I would say like definitely 95% and above are very, very valid for almost any other technical documentation purposes. And we found that they can be very easily adapted even for general banking, like financial aspects of banking information. And the concept, the setup of the specification is such that you can very easily adapt STE to suit and cover your specific needs. So it mainly entails adding to the dictionary, which are always customarily made, even for our aerospace customers.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. I think this is going into my direction. Can I implement this software also in Microsoft Word? Yes. As I mentioned before, I showed you a range of editors which we support. Actually, if you have a look at Microsoft Word, it looks exactly the same. So you have the same panels, you have the same functionality, just that your editing environment is Word. So here, this is now not an STE sample, it's just regular English text. But you can see if I click it, I have the same behavior. Okay, let's change it to some English rule set. And you can see that you get the same feedback about the language check and the rules you have enabled. You get similar sentences and all that. Something which we should mention is that Microsoft Word is, of course, not as suited for some STE rules as an XML documentation, because there are some STE rules which require to recognize procedures or descriptions and stuff like that. And that's a little bit more difficult in Word than it is in XML documentation. Of course, in Word you can have different styles, and you can have a style which is called a procedure, and you can have a style which is called description. But most of the styles in Word, they are pretty random, so actually you can create as much styles as you want, and often it's not the case that you really use the correct style when writing a procedure. So there are some STE rules which are not as applicable in Word as they are in other editing environments. But in general, yes, of course, you can write in Word, and yes, you can write according the STE rule package in Word. And of course, you also have the possibility to collect new technical names, build up your technical name database, and all the functionality we saw before in XML. Okay, do we have any more questions? Okay, we have another one. Does Simplified Technical English make technical writers redundant at some point?
So I believe that question is intended for me.
Yeah, I think so.
No, actually quite the opposite. It requires a different mindset. It does not do away with the need for technical writers. It requires people to become more flexible, more creative. Technical writers, one of the things that I've heard, or rather I would say one of the common problems of technical writers is that sometimes their jobs become a little bit dry and boring because they are just typing all the time just to get this text out on time with the correct type of information. There's hardly any room or extra time to the luxury of time actually to consider other aspects of their documents. So it is very much done on the autopilot, so to speak. But basically, if you are a technical writer wanting or aiming to write according to a standard like STE, it requires you to become more creative, to have more consideration for your audience, as well as for some specific rules that were designed to make your job more efficient, but that is not to say easier. So coming from a very truthful point of view, not 100% of the technical writers that we work with are actually able in practice to adopt STE. And I'm saying this from the assumption that they have not acquired any kind of extra software help. So 90% of them are, and what they actually find is that their job becomes more interesting. There will be more interaction with engineering, with the subject matter experts in general, to actually establish those details that would easily be overlooked in standard English, because standard English allows you to be vague and more or less convincing at the same time. Now, vague and convincing, in simplified English, we have to choose between the two. That is why I say your job, the results of your documents will become more efficient to read, but not necessarily easier. So it will either be vague, and that means we can't write proper simplified English, or we write simplified English, which means things will be very, very convincing. So basically in simplified English, we need to have all the technical details in place in order to write meaningful text that is helpful to our users, and it makes our job more entertaining because we need to actively learn more about the product. So software and the specification will not replace the writer, even though we live in an age where more and more jobs are overtaken by machines. So they will only help to make your job more effective, more entertaining, more accurate, and more useful to your audience.
I completely agree. I think we are very far away from a machine really writing and taking away our writing jobs.
Yes.
Let's be thankful for that. Okay, we have another question. So can I export the technical name database? So I assume you are asking out of the system or into the system. I mean, I can describe both ways. The technical name database is actually a terminology database, technically speaking, so it's TBX format, and it can be easily imported and exported into other environments using the CSV format or the TBX format. So you can easily import technical names into the Congree system and out of the Congree system if the Congree system is the one collecting the terms or the technical names. Okay, I would suggest. I mean, we still have a little bit of time. Let's wait. Maybe we get some more questions. If not, please remember that you can contact us later if you might prefer to have your question discussed in private, or if you come up with questions later. Okay, looks like we covered everything.
I think so, yes.
So, Shumin, thank you very much for this very enlightening presentation about STE. And thanks to our attendees for taking interest in this matter. Yeah, I hope we could help you out, spark your interest in STE, and yeah, let us know by contacting us if you need to want to know more, and if you want to go deeper into the topic of STE. So thank you very much.
So thank you all. Thank you, Philip. Thank you all for your attention and interest in today's session. So let's keep in touch.
Goodbye, everyone. See you.
Bye. Philip, can you still hear me?
Just a second. I need to stop this somehow.
Mm-hmm.